Fred, you ready? Welcome to the Board of Selectmen Finance Appropriation and Advisory Committee meeting Tuesday, April 19th, 2022 at the Dudley Municipal Complex. First order of business is called order, Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Next is consent agenda. Board.
Mr. Chair, make a motion that we accept the consent agenda as presented, which includes minutes of April 4th and the reappointment of Veterans Agent Steve Rogerson, term to expire 4/30/2023.
Second.
All in favor?
Roll call.
Roll call.
Stephen Sullivan, aye.
Roll call vote.
Terry Siganovich.
Joe Marcy, aye.
Jay Johnson, aye. Unanimous.
Mr. Chairman, can the record reflect that John Marcy is on the phone, please? In dialing, participating remotely.
Thank you. Number 3, citizens' comments. Anyone from the crowd wish to speak
About something not on the agenda.
about something not on the agenda? Thank you. Hearing none. New business. Anything, Mr. Town Administrator?
Our new business was postponed due to illness, Mr. Chairman.
Old business. Board of Selectmen and FAA to take any supplemental action on budget, warrant, or any other action relative thereto.
Mr. Chairman, before I begin, I wanted to thank the FAA, the Board of Selectmen, to consent to meet to talk about a very important subject, which is school financing for FY23 and going forward. That's the only thing that is left unsettled for our proposed budget for FY23. As I'm sure everybody recalls, in 2018 we passed an override to help us get to a number that we could meet our assessment requirements for the school district. We went from 7.7 million. We passed a $1.5 million override, which placed us right around 9.3 going forward. We brought in an independent consultant, Mark Abrahams, and he did an assessment as to how long we anticipated that override would last. And he anticipated 2 to 3 years, and here we are at year 4. And I think it's time we had another long-term discussion about our ability to meet the school's needs and meet our obligation to the schools. So this year, of course, like I said, we were able to meet our obligation for several years. Had COVID in between that. We were able to get through COVID, to meet our obligation there, but like anything else, the school assessment consistently, as it has for decades, outpaces our tax levy. We don't have the ability to raise taxes to meet the needs of the school on an annual basis. So my first recommendation is that the FAA, the Board of Selectmen, certainly the school committee, all stand behind an override within the next 12 months and give the question to the people to vote as to whether or not they want to take that action. Mathematically, there's no other way around it. We don't grow quickly enough to meet the needs of the annual school assessment. And I think we're all pretty much in universal agreement with that point. That's the midterm solution. But for the short-term solution, which is the FY23 request, as the FAA and the Board of Selectmen recalls, we passed a 5% increase from Dudley's assessment. That's not 5% overall, because overall the assessment between Charlton and Dudley is less than 2.5%. But it's a 5% increase over FY22. In FY22, Our current year, our budget for the school, our assessment is $9,310,599. The school committee, I believe, is at a requested budget of $10,265,432. Is that still the correct number?
Same as what we passed.
Same as what you passed, okay. So that translates to Dudley at a 10.25% increase over last year. When you get into the $10 million range, that's a pretty substantial increase. So at 5%, the increase is $480,920. That's what the FAA and the Board of Selectmen passed. We had a discussion, we've had an internal discussion back and forth about maybe a compromise number that gets us closer to the FY23 request from the school committee. That number is a 7.5% increase over last year, which amounts to $760,000, almost $761,000 total. That's at 7.5%. And so what I'm presenting tonight to the FAA and to the Board of Selectmen is a proposed article for the Springtown meeting, and everybody should have had a chance to see it. To see if the town will vote to transfer from free cash $280,000 or some such fund, some such sum as a supplemental appropriation to the Dudley Charlton Regional School District's budget for use in FY23 or take any other action relative thereto. So 280 plus the 480, which is the 5% increase that the FAA and the Board of Selectmen passed, amounts to a $760,000 increase, roughly over last year. So I'm proposing that one last financial article to add to the spring budget. I asked the schools to come in and join us tonight to kind of have a discussion as to what each percentage change means to their budget and whether or not that's a compromise that we can reach. So.
I just want to add, Mr. Chair, when Mr. Ruda was giving his financial numbers, if the amount of $760,920 is somehow agreed upon, that's a 7.5% increase. We talked about the 5%, which is the 480. If we were to somehow get to the 760, that's a 7.5% increase. And just as an aside, I don't think I'm going to surprise anybody when I say there's not one budget on the town side that's increasing, let alone at 5%, but let alone at 7.5%.
So, Mr. Chairman, I'll add to that and just say that when we passed our $1.5 million override, we got up to 9.3, and we had we infused the entire 1.5, which brought us from 7.7 to 9.3. And we've been hovering around that 9.3 number on average since we passed the override. Our new growth numbers on average are between 110 and 140 annually. So there's, that doesn't take into consideration compliance and regulatory issues that we're trying to address, contractual obligations, so forth and so on. So we just simply do not grow at a pace that can keep up with that assessment. Even with the new projects that we have coming into town, we had a year delay, we put back a year, and even with those new projects, it's still not a fast enough pace to reach that obligation. So my strong recommendation is that we all consider within the next 12 months putting an override question on the ballot. The only way we can meet that assessment. Next year's assessment, FY24's, if we don't pass an override, is going to be, I think, fairly troublesome for both the school and the town. So I was hoping we could hear more from the schools as to what those percentages actually mean.
Excuse me.
Is there anything before we? Okay. Call school up?
Works for me.
You want us coming up there?
Sure. Seating for 4. If anyone else wants, We can make some room too.
I want no part of it.
Coming up, Gene? Come on up, Gene. Come on up, Gene. Good evening. Thank you for having us. I'll just introduce my colleagues. So I'm Kenny LaFerriere, a member of the school committee from Charlton and chairman of the budget finance subcommittee. And then Ms. Jean Costello, member from Charlton. Mrs. Catherine Kabala, member from Dudley. And our current chair of the school committee, Mrs. Pauline O'Coin from Dudley. And then Mr. Matthew, our Director of Finance and Operations, and Superintendent Lamache. So thank you for having us. And so first of all, obviously we all recognize and we're all in agreement that everyone's under tough times. You know, we get it, we understand. Just to kind of refresh and discuss a few things, the school committee has currently passed that that budget of 4.03% increase to the overall budget. And that's where we currently stand. So obviously no decisions can be made tonight until we go back to school committee for further discussion. That being said, as a reminder, we have brought to the table that budget with cuts already in it. So there's no new growth, no new technology, and loss of positions. And some staff will lose their position depending on the way it works out with attrition and retirements and that sort of thing. But the point I'm making is we've already come to the table with cuts to programs, technology, and to individual staff. So that's how we landed at that number, because if we go to the next one, it's more massive cuts. Secondly, just to again to review for those at home, we have the regional agreement, and so if we make a change here in Dudley with the overall increase in the assessment, we have to go back to Charlton and lower that assessment. So that adds to the cuts, and that's looking at approximately, when I reviewed with Mr. Matthew, it was about $600,000 worth of cuts to the school budget, because obviously the assessments are based on that formula. So if we lower here, we have to lower in Charlton. So that also impacts the overall budget and the needs because of the regional agreement. I'm happy to, if others people want to add, or if my colleagues want to add, or if there are questions, I just thought that would be a good starting point.
So Mr. Chairman, as we continue the discussion, I think it's important that everyone here realize that the money that we would be, the compromise amount that we're offering would be a one-time amount of $760, because that money will be coming out of free cash. Our free cash number, it's not a guarantee. As the board and the FAA are aware, we're subsidizing FY23 with some ARPA money that we're anticipating that we've been awarded. So this is going forward. This is not a sustainable amount.
So, Mr. Chair, in frank terms, the 280 would leave us with what in free cash?
280 would leave us with about 120 in free cash.
So, carry the other math guy, 75%?
120 goes,
Left
what
out
was
of
that?
400,000? Take
280,
280.
280 and 110?
280 out of 400 is 75%.
I just got done with tax season, man. My brain's a little...
Anyway, which would affect the town side, your ability to borrow at certain rates. I know the treasurer's not here, right? That's all factored into what the town's bond rating.
It's absolutely, well, use of free cash to balance the budget is always a problem.
Correct. Just want to get that out there.
We rely on that more and more every year.
70%. Not bad off the top of my head.
Mine will work fine for the next meeting, I promise. So my recommendation is to, the FAA and the Board of Selectmen, is to put forward this article at the town meeting for a $280,000 infusion supplemental amount in the fall. We put it on the spring warrant, however, to make sure that everyone was on the same page, everyone knew that that article existed, and we've set aside the free cash number to do that do that with. But again, we've all got to be on the same page and understand that it's not sustainable. And next year, if the override were to go onto a ballot and it were not to pass, there's no way that we could come up to this number. We also have to get the school committee to agree to the compromise number of 760, which as was noted, it would be a reduction on the Charlton side that's asking, that they're offering the full requested assessment amount. So it has a double impact on the school, on the regional school budget.
Through the chair, I'm sorry, Mr. Ruda.
But if we don't have the ability to get to a compromise number, it's something that we're placed that we don't want to be, where Charlton was a few years ago, and have a town meeting battle. Nobody wants that.
Through the chair, I was just going to comment that I spoke with Selectman Borowski in Charlton, and Charlton has approved the 4.03 budget for upcoming town meeting. Just an FYI. So they're all set to go.
I think Charlton's Mr. Chair, I think Charlton's in a little different financial place than we are currently and going forward. I mean, we get the assessors report every year, and we set our tax rate, and we're at 94, 95% residential. I don't have the report in front of me, but I think Charlton is more like 75, 80. So they get a lot more business industrial tax base than we don't. We just don't have it. So while I appreciate Charlton's ability to reach their number, I would hope, I know Mr. Ruda talks a lot to the TA on their side, I would think that they would be sympathetic to our inability to reach the number as easily as they can. Nicest way I can put it.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, through the chair, I just want to compliment Town Administrator John Ruder for working with us and trying to come up with a creative way to not only address this year, and we are under the same understanding. Using free cash for operating expenses is not a structure that we're in support of. That's town decision, but that's not something that we're looking for. We do appreciate the idea for this year for a one-year fix to get it to a longer-term solution, which we've been working with Town Administrator Ruder on as well, and with you and with FAA. So we appreciate all of that effort and all of the work there. I think, as anything, there's compromise involved. We have to take a look at that and figure out how to do it. But we do need a one-year, looks like what we need right now collectively is a one-year fix, and then a long-term fix that we need to work together on.
So the last option, Mr. Chairman, if we were to find some way to put together enough money to come up with the FY23 request, would be we would wipe out any ARPA money that was awarded in this current fiscal year in order to meet that request. And that would have a direct impact on any stabilization amount that we would be able to put away next year.
Can you elaborate on what that would mean? We heard what the
That would mean that we...
reduction in budgets for the school would be. So what would be the impact on the town?
The impact on the town would be that next year, if the override were not to pass, we would have no source of income, of additional savings to pull from in order to meet the assessment. It would mean that at an 8.5 current inflation rate, which is forecasted to be at about 12% by the end of this calendar year, 25,000 in FAA reserve, we would have no ability to go back in October and fortify ourselves. All of our cards would be on the table, all the money would be out.
And Mr. City Administrator, the ARPA funds that you talk about, basically one-time infusions, that's not a revolving source of revenue, and we're using ARPA to help cover shortfalls in our revenue and others that we lost because of the pandemic.
The other option is that we would cut back on next year's FY23 budget and not meet regulatory compliance issues, and
So we'll just pay fines like we did before.
It would cost us more money to do that type of thing.
Stormwater management fines, dam compliance, everything that we've been.
Public safety issues.
Public safety.
Right, everything we've been
bridges,
dealing with.
Dams.
Yeah. Stormwater management, we got dinged a couple times.
Mm-hmm.
didn't have the money to do it properly. I mean, Jeff's on top of it now, but can't be on top of it when it's zero funded.
And just like the schools, we have contractual obligations. We're in the middle of negotiations with the police right now.
I guess my question is for the school committee. If we can compromise down to this number that's not, that Charlton's already approved this, where are you guys on a compromise for us? I mean, are you willing to accept something?
So we can't comment tonight because there's a quorum technically, and we don't
Right,
want to
yeah,
get into that
but
because
it-
we didn't post. So, first of all, and secondly, I honestly don't know where the school committee is as far as the votes and what will happen with that. But I just wanted to also comment, I'm glad you brought that up, that, and believe me, I don't want you to think I'm sitting here not recognizing the situation. I'm just kind of trying to have this dialogue and conversation because I think it's important. Having to get to that compromise number would put us at a worse situation than the 3.23. Is that correct, Mr. Matthew? The middle?
Through the chair, I think Mr. Mayot's asking for the compromise at to get to the 3.23. It's
okay.
just the mechanisms in which they're trying to arrive at that.
To get to that.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's the compromise from the 4.03 to 3.23.
Right, the first to the second.
I think that's what Mr. Mayot's question was.
I just don't want to go through the motions of putting, money into this compromise budget, and then it's defeated because you already got a commitment from Charlton for the full amount you want, and you don't accept it from
Right.
us, so.
So I can answer that as, I do know the committee is hesitant to continue to cut.
Right.
And for the past 3 years that I've been on, every year we've had a cut. And we have no new growth, no new technology, no new programs. It's continued to be cut. So I know that my sense is from the school committee is it's going to be a hard sell to get to 3.23. But again, I can't say that with ultimate certainty because we need to deliberate as a committee to discuss that. Right. We brought it up at our last meeting, like I raised the topic during our report at the school committee meeting. But it was more of just to FYI, start ruminating on it, but we didn't have any deliberation because it wasn't on the agenda to deliberate at that point because we were still working with all of you. Right. So we're not at that point. As of today, we're at 4.03.
Mr. Sullivan.
Mr. Matthew and Ms. LaMarche were here recently, and they did an excellent presentation, and I understand you're talking about cuts, but again, a compromised number of 7.5% increase. I don't see how they can make cuts, but I can't call it a cut. And also, I think it was last spring, around this time, I was remote, I remember dialing in, and the school committee came and took, I believe it was $165,000 extra to make up for money they used out of their reserves the year before, that we gave them to make them whole on reserves that they used. So to say we've cut them every year, I think is not disingenuous, too strong a word. We've met our minimum commitment plus, counting the override money. So part of me, the cynic in me says, we as a collective should say, no, work from your minimum budget up. They come in with a big number and make it through negotiations or by the apparent is, oh, we've reduced our request by 5%, because it was originally 12, right? The first numbers we've seen was like 12.1.
I think overall it was at 12, I think.
Yeah, so to say, and I know cuts happen, we cut on our side. I mean, the fire chief will get up and speak about how he's level funded every year, except for contractual obligations. So to start at 12 and we get down to 7 over last year, and like Mr. Ruder said, to infuse that cash is like a one-time infusion. We're gonna be next year behind the barrel double, because Mr. LaMarche or Mr. Matthew, I forget, one of them talked about, I think it was something like 1.6 million you folks received through, I don't know if it was ARPA money, that's probably gonna be gone.
ESSER. That's the school money.
So that's probably gonna be gone. We're gonna be looking at that already next year, right? So the optics of a 12.1 to get to 7.5, to talk about devastating cuts, if we cut the town side, but make it a 7.5, I could see some give and take, but that's just my opinion. I haven't discussed it. I talked a little bit with the administrator, but it's just, I don't know. It's an unreachable number. 760 is virtually unreachable.
I think Mr. Chairman, during the pandemic, especially 2020, it's hard to judge where everything was. We had some CARE Act money that we infused into the school, and the school took a cut to give us a break going into the beginning of the pandemic, just to make sure that there wasn't any shortfalls that, you know, we had from a public health standpoint, that we had to respond to. So FY 2021 was a little bit off because of the pandemic. It's hard to do a judgment call in terms of who did what during the pandemic. But I will say that since the override was passed, the school budget request has been within the range of 9.3 consistently for the amount of time that the override was supposed to last. And again, I sound like a broken record, but with an overall average of between 110 and 140,000 in new growth, the math does not work that we could ever meet any sort of assessment going forward, particularly if we're starting from a standpoint of, I don't know, I think it came up to 900 and the budget that the school committee passed was just $40,000 short of $1 million increase. There's no chance that we could ever reach that number without an override. So I think that really needs to be, I'm driving that point home because it needs to happen. It needs to happen for the district, it needs to happen for the town. Everybody should be on board and universally in agreement on that at this point.
I mean, basically, the bottom line is, I mean, we can, you know, the town can come up and have a one-time infusion of, you know, another 280. We can do that, but obviously that's not backed up by any revenues. That's just savings account, basically. But I guess my real question is if that isn't going to fly through the school committee, I mean, you know. What's the point?
And I'll even
I mean, I don't want
I
that to all get
understand.
defeated. We put the money in an account and we get defeated because because there's no way we're going to be able to get to the budget that they passed. There's no way. I mean, we can hit the compromise and get the money in there, but I don't think there's any way we can hit the school budget committee. I mean, the school committee's budget. So I guess it's just the feeling of what you guys feel, where this is going to go. So.
I'm happy to comment, but I didn't want to interrupt.
I just want to ask before we lose the point. Mr. Ruder mentioned it twice, and it's been mentioned before, and going forward, I'm sure it's going to be mentioned. And override's forever, we all know that, we all agree. And I keep hearing the override money is gone, but the override money comes every year. So just if Mr. Matthew or maybe Mr. Lamarche could, because people are going to want to know, they're going to want to ask, and I honestly don't know the answer. When we say the money's gone, it's not really gone because it keeps coming. Can you explain what, I'm sure Mr. Ruder picked up on that from talking to you folks. What do you mean by gone?
So, I mean, the money, the 1.5 million is there every year. Our revenue, our new growth, our ability to, our levy limit is not there. So that, if we didn't pass that override, we'd still be in the $7.88 million assessment range. There's no way we could meet the 9.3. So that money is there every year, but now we're outpacing 9.3. Now we're at 10.2. Where's that money coming from? We don't have the ability to raise taxes enough to get to that amount and still maintain the municipal side of things.
Well, in my opinion, that's going to be the toughest sell if that's the route. We come up with consensus, or the school committee drives the debt exclusion question. People are going to ask that question. I think the average person is not going to understand, because that was part of the makeup provision to that money, right? We were short. They kept saying Dudley was short through the years, and we used that to, as you say, boost the budget, but part of it was a makeup
I think that's, Greg was the TA at the time, but I think that was part of the,
Out of the number.
the entire number, 100% was what went right to the school for year one. And then the assessment came in as the assessment would going forward after that. But as we continue the conversation, one thing I want to make certain that we're careful of is if we want to, if the long-term goal is to pass an override, we don't want to have a town meeting battle because that will sink the override absolutely, without question. We need to make the decision with a number that everyone can live with. If you have a battle at town meeting, I think we write off the override because everybody will be not upset.
Exactly.
If I could just, I'd like to make sure I understand what's been proposed. So there's a warrant article that the town administrator is sponsoring to appropriate an additional $280,000 from free cash for the school department budget. But the intention is to pass this in the fall and pass over it at the annual town meeting?
The intention is to pass it in the fall. I mean, we would pass it in the fall to see if that number changed, if your number changed, if we got adjusted up, down, so that we had the right number, because I think it's close to having the right number in October than it is in May. But it would be there, the money would be there in the spring.
So that school committee and the FAA and the Board of Selectmen are completely clear on this. What this will require is for the school committee to reduce its budget down to whatever number is going to be appropriated at town meeting, and then send a supplemental assessment in the fall. Just so that we're absolutely clear about that.
And we have to do the same in Charlton.
Yes, and that's the other thing. There's a partner in Charlton that would have to agree to this mechanism to not take their excess appropriation at this point in time and put it someplace where it's not accessible to us. We'd want to make sure that they leave their books, their vote as is, and then come back in the fall with, as Mr. Ruda said, the appropriate number.
But Mr. Chair, would Mr. Ruda said number up, down, stay the same, would the intent be to cap it at 280? Like, that's the 7.5. If we come back in the fall and, I'll just throw it out there, somebody says, no, we need 500.
My intent was to cap it at 5%.
Yeah,
So,
no, listen,
I mean,
I'm
that's
ready
a
to
big
make-
number.
You know
That
what I'm
would be
saying?
the intent, but we don't know what's gonna, I think we'll have a better idea in October as to what we need to, it will be in the 280 range. It could be a little more. Maybe it could be less, probably won't be, but that would be our range is 280. We've gotta be able to pay the bill is the bottom line, so that the sky couldn't be the limit. And 280 is about what we could do.
Through the chair. So, Mr. Ruder, just help me understand, excuse my naivete. I don't understand the purpose of waiting till the fall.
The purpose of waiting till the fall is because as we had conversations, and we've had conversations with Mr. LaMarche and Mr. Matthew and Mr. Mayotte, Mr. Marcy, it's not entirely clear as to what the exact certain numbers are gonna come in at, unless that has changed.
In terms of the school budget?
Yeah.
Well, we certainly have the assessment based on the 4.03% budget increase, and we have the assessment based on the 3.23% budget increase. The difference, I think, between your 5% number and the 3.23% budget was approximately $278,000. So I think that's why we're talking about the $280,000 rough number.
Right. But we've had numbers change, like the cherry sheet number, we spoke about that 2 hours ago. The cherry sheet numbers changed a little bit for the town. There was another number we were talking about, Rich, I don't remember what it was. Transportation, is that it?
Yeah, there's a move to hopefully sponsor regional transportation at 100% rather than the 80% that the governor approved in the House Ways and Means budget included. So that would be an infusion of additional dollars as well.
Was it, how much was that, Rich? Was it a couple hundred
200.
thousand?
It'd be about 200,000, yeah, if they went to the full amount.
So I hope through the chair that answered the questions. We're not, I'd rather have a solid number as opposed to just throwing the number out there. If we can get a better number in October, we'd be, happy to do that. We're not trying to, nobody thinks or is trying to pull the wool over anybody's eyes here. We just want to have a good number in October.
And through the chair, I hear you, Mr. Ruder. I guess the issue, though, comes back to what we just talked about. Then we won't have a number for this budget, and we'd have to go back to Charlton, readjust their assessment. So how would we, you know what I'm saying? Like, I guess what I'm confused about, and Mr. Matthew can correct me if I'm wrong, is if the numbers change, we always work with the town once we get the final numbers, don't we?
Generally, the assessments don't change after annual town meeting.
After town meeting, yeah.
So if the assessment through the chair were to go on in the spring with the additional 280, if it were a $760,000 assessment, there would be nobody would leave this room thinking for a second that we could meet that number next year, right? We couldn't
It's gonna
add-
go up next year.
Yeah.
Right.
But nobody would think for a second that we could reach above and beyond 760 as a new amount next year. That's another thing that why we were trying to keep it separate from the assessment, so that we weren't building on a number that we already can't reach next year.
But I think that goes back to your long-term discussion about correcting this issue long-term and not just a year-to-year thing.
Right, and I, through the chair, we have to all be on the same page and understand that if that override didn't pass, we're gonna have problems.
Agreed, no, I hear you, but I guess, again, just to, and this doesn't make it any easier, but the situation we're in now is only going to get worse as far as the school budget and the increases. It's never gonna go down, right? The fuel's up, and costs are up, and contractual obligations, it continues, it's gonna continue. The other piece too, I know Selectman Sullivan, we talked about it a bit, how it's unachievable, and I hear you. And there is a problem with the state formula and the way it's calculated. I understand that. The problem is, the state has said X, this is the number, and they expect the communities to pick up the difference. It's not us saying that, it's the formula. And so, my point is, there's nowhere to go except our local communities, because the state has already said they're overpaying us by X dollars, because they feel that we're getting more than we should based on their assessment and their formula. So, unfortunately, every year we're gonna be back at this table, unless there's a long-term solution.
So, I think what Mr. Ruder was saying, even at the 760, the extra 280, if that were somehow, and that gets baked into the budget, that becomes part of the base budget next year. And what Mr. Ruder was saying, that is well above our ability to raise revenue in that amount, well above our ability to use stabilization, well above virtually every dime and nickel we have. So, and once again, we're gonna be in the same position if schools ask for an override and it passes, how do we go back to the people in 3 years and say, well,
I think we'll, Mr.
I know,
Chairman,
cross that bridge when we come to it, it's an easy answer.
we'll go through we'll restructure the override to be a little bit different than the previous one, more of a structural override than
Because what's gonna ultimately happen
short-term fix.
is we're gonna, in a year or so, we're gonna be going to our department heads, our workers, similar to what we did about 8 or 10 years ago, and say, sorry, every new dollar is going over here, every savings is going to this part, to this portion of the budget, we're going to a 4-day work week, 3-day work week. And people And I had 4 children that went through the school system, so it's not a critique of the school system.
No,
And I have family members that work in the school system. But my opinion, not speaking for the board, it's just important that people say it's about the children, about the education, and I get it. Like I said, my kids had a great education. We as selectmen, it's also about those children and their families having the ability to go on safe roads, the ability, if they need a police officer to come, if they need a fire. And, we will pay overtime, we'll cover every shift to the possible last dollar. But, the taxpayer expects to be able to come to the town hall and pay the bill when they can, not when we tell them they can. I understand there's online paying, but if Mr. Carmignani was here. So we're gonna be at a point, unless we can change it structurally, and I trust smarter people than me to try to sell the override, we're gonna be structurally in a worse place than the schools are gonna be within a year or two. No doubt in my mind. I mean, we at one point, was it last summer, we laid off the whole entire highway department. We kept like 3 guys just in case the tree went down or something got blocked. I mean, we couldn't roll to an emergency.
It's basically $1 million off 10 million left to run the town. That's what the proposal is.
No, I know, I understand. I'm just saying, we're gonna be at a point pretty quick, unless we go back to the town like we did. We had there was a 4-point override last night: school, police, fire, town side. I mean, and I understand that everyone's trying to do the best they can, but I'm just trying to advocate for the big picture. And that's where I see things going.
Mike? Steve?
Mr. Chairman, a couple of points. One is, when we talked about the long-term fix, that's not just the schools. That's for all of us together. That is a fix for the town and for the schools. That's not, when we look at a long-term solution, I know tonight we're talking a lot about the schools, but that's for the entire community. That's of Dudley. That's not just for the schools. Just similar to the last override, that was 2 years at the assessment. The town did not provide an assessment to the schools because it was an override for 2 years. So again, whatever long-term fix we go into, that's all of us together. And that's why it's the only way it's gonna work. If you just rely on the schools because the schools technically received the last override, people aren't gonna support that. You're 100% right. So it has to be a community of Dudley override, not just the schools. The other thing too is, from what I'm hearing, and I think the struggle with coming to the compromise, and I appreciate what Mr. Sullivan said and Mr. Mayotte, your visuals, we came from the top and worked our way down. We should work from the bottom and work our way up. That's what we're trying to negotiate right now and try to get to. I think the school committees, and I don't mean to speak because they're here, but the struggle with meeting the budget that has been designed so far by the town of Dudley at $500,000 brings us well below the 3.23% increase, which means we're getting closer to 20 staff member reductions within our budget. So I think that's where the struggle is. But like Mr. Mayotte asked, can school committee get to closer to 3.23? As a superintendent, I believe that they can, but that's what we're trying to solidify tonight. So if the assessment is going to be $500,000 for the annual town budget, and we have to reduce Charlton's, and then we're collectively working together as a group to say that we will make up the difference in the fall, I think school committee will work towards that. But if it's just going to be the 500,000, school committee is going to struggle with lowering their 4.03. And I'm just guessing from all the work that I've done around this as to what that actually looks like coming into it. But I think there's always a compromise on the table. And I think we could always work towards one. But I think right now we're trying to, as we've said earlier, we're trying to look at a long-term fix, which we have to start working on yesterday. But we have to figure out a way to figure out FY23 right now. And that's what we're trying to do right now.
If I may.
Mr. Chairman,
Hold on, John, one sec.
I was simply going to say that as part of any sort of multi-year solution, discussion in the summer, fall, winter, into budget season of next year, that long-term multi-year solution has to take into account any revenue issues the town has, on its side. It also has to take into account any revenue issues the school has on its side. That's the whole point of it. But, for example, this year we're including $100,000 of charter tuition revenue that we have not included in the past. Again, it's because our revenue started off as, negative. With the House Ways and Means, there's a little bit more light there, but that's not a guarantee as to where the full House will land or the Senate will land. So again, any sort of multi-year solution has to take into account both the town's revenue concerns as well as the schools.
Mr. Marcy?
Yeah, that's a really good point by Mr. Matthew, and I just wanted to echo Superintendent LaMarche's point about this is a joint solution between the town and the schools, because school needs funding, town needs to fix the structure to provide said funding. So what I want to know, everybody here, before we start talking in circles, is where do we land now? Okay, we have a track record of working together to solve big problems, and I think we're agreeing that we're going to need something structural next year, which gives plenty of runway for both sides to make the case to the people on why this is needed. You know, we already planted the seed several years ago when we did this the first time. I was right there with Superintendent Desto, working with them on this. So it takes time. But right now, the town's offering what we can do right now. There's nothing, you know, being hidden. This is what works best. You know, everybody, and we also don't pick each other's line items apart. So I'm not going to do that now. But you know, which brings me to my other point from earlier from Mr. Sullivan. You know, the word cut is used pretty generously. Now, when the budget's going up, it's not necessarily cut. School does have the ability to move money in between its budget to fund programs that parents and the community needs, and they can do that until we get something appropriate, a mechanism that will fund it, you know, ongoing to do that. So I just wanted to make that point. You know, when you have that kind of an increase, it's not a cut, right? The town is working to bring this number up, not down. Okay, I want to be clear here. So, Mr. Town Administrator, where do we stand now, and what do we need to do to get this moved forward? What number? What percent?
So through the chair, we have a few options. Option one is to grant the assessment at 7.5%, which would increase what we previously voted on. No article, it goes right on the assessment. It seems to me, after having this conversation 3 or 4 times, that FY24, that amount of money will not be there if the override doesn't pass. If we do an override and it doesn't pass. So it's fairly irrelevant as to whether or not at this point we do it through an assessment or through an article. The article, I think, gives us one extra layer of the ability to adjust that number in October. I think it's, you know, I think I'd like to have that ability, you know, to try to meet the number instead of just throwing 280 at it. If we had more money to work with, maybe we can make an adjustment to the benefit of the school, or maybe it decreases if the school ends up getting more money. Who knows? But it gives us that ability to adjust it in October. But the bottom line is, no matter what we vote here tonight, my recommendation is 760. It's not what the school committee voted. Unfortunately, we can't meet that request without the town administrator, and Dudley would be irresponsible if I said bring our savings down to $100,000 on a $26 million budget. That would be just wildly irresponsible. So my recommendation is 760. It's up to the FAA and the selectmen to talk about whether they want to do it as part of the assessment at the Springtown meeting, or they want to do it in the form of an article. Either way, we can't meet that. We can't build on an increase next year if the override doesn't pass. So if we leave here tonight, having voted one way or another, and asking the school committee to consider the compromise number as to what we can meet, I think that's what I'm looking for tonight.
Okay. Now, through the chair, Mr. Mayor, can you ask the FAA what they would like to do?
Does anybody have any opinions?
I would go with the article, Mr. Chairman.
Ann?
I agree. The article.
So the current, you wanna fund it through this article, or you wanna add it? You guys don't wanna add it to an assessment?
No.
For me, either way, it's $280,000. Either way, whether you get it through an article in the fall, or we add it to the assessment. My only concern about adding it to the assessment is, you know, that this is coming over as one-time payment. This isn't revenue that's coming in unless we get the override on this amount of money. So if we don't get an override and we're sitting here next year and we're unable to even get to that point, I don't want it to be perceived that, you know, the selectmen and the FAA are cutting the budget. I don't want it to be perceived that way, because this is infusion of one-time money. So that's kind of my only concern about adding to the assessment. So I'm not opposed to adding it. It's just, I just don't want to be sitting here being accused of cutting the school budget next year. So.
Sure. I just, again, whatever you decide, we're gonna work with you on that. We've been working all along with you. My only point is, if you do put an article in the fall and it fails in the fall, that means we're making reductions in the school year, during the school year.
Yeah, that was my next question.
And that's just a point that has to be thrown out there, that to be clear, that will occur. So but we will work with you moving forward.
And through the chair, not to interrupt you, but that's what I was gonna go to with Mr. Lamache, was it's, I think, more impactful to have to do reductions in the middle of the school year and have to make all kinds of changes instead of planning for it for next year. That would be my only thing about concern about doing it with the article in the fall. And my question too, and again, this is just for all of us to talk about, your point, Mr. Mayotte, about the money being cut next year. Help me understand, or help the people understand that, where the long-term solution that Town Administrator Reuter's talking about would have to happen, because this number, like, to this year's assessment, is not going to go down next year. So I guess I was lost with your comment.
It's because we're funding it with savings account. We're now changing our ability to give an additional 480 now goes up to 790. That becomes your baseline. So when we're only able to produce the 480 and a little bit extra, you know, next year, because we didn't get an override, it's going to look like a cut from the 790. That's what I'm trying to avoid.
I understand your
I'm
point.
trying to avoid that, that perception that's going to be out there that we're cutting the school budget.
Right, right, yeah. If I could comment too, just to speak about savings, and again, I'm sure you've all heard this or talked with it with administration, but we have to fund our budget every year with the E&D.
Right.
So we're not even able to save the adequate amount, and that's been the way for I don't know how long, years and years and years, and that is obviously inappropriate for a long-term solution on this end.
Right.
You know, so I'm just talking as far as you talked about savings. We're doing the same. We're taking.
Yeah,
is it $1.2 million that we're
significant
taking
this
out of
year, right?
E&D?
Your E&D amounts that you're using?
It's I think 1.2.
Pretty significant.
Yeah, 1.1 million, that's been
1.1
pretty
million.
static the last couple of years.
Out of E&D to fund operating, which that also goes into the discussions that we've been here before about capital. Some of our capital we could do it within our budget with E&D if we didn't have to fund operating, but we're taking it out of operating, so then we need support. You know, it goes back and forth.
All right,
The only thing I will say is, Mr. Chairman, before, if there's a concern about the fall, if it didn't pass in the fall, I think we would have some better ability to react in the fall by doing amendments on the floor if we needed to switch that and make sure that we met our obligation. I think we'd have a much tighter ability. It's free cash. We could reallocate the free cash elsewhere, and I think we could do it on the floor if we needed to. If it didn't pass, if the article failed, we could still get that money. Again, but it would be a one-time shot.
let's try to get the last comments, Mr. Sullivan.
So, Mr. Chairman, to the administrator, so as it stands now, we took a vote action at our last meeting to fund a 5% increase,
Correct.
which is that 480,920 number.
Correct.
And if I'm hearing the administrator correctly, and we as town people, two members from the school committee that live in town, empower the town administrator to make best recommendation in his opinion for the best benefit of the whole. And if I'm hearing it correct, the town administrator is recommending a warrant article as opposed to the 760, even though we've all made it clear, I think everyone agrees, a lot of heads nodding on both sides. That 760 is a savings account infusion, but it'll become baked into that assessed number next year. So we pay and trust Mr. Ruda to make the decisions, best informed decisions to us. And he can correct me if I'm wrong. If I'm hearing it correctly, we leave our 5% vote stand, and you're looking for an action to approve this proposed warrant article in the amount of 280, understanding it's an amount that may go up, may go down, but I think we all agree it can't go up to reach the 10%, you know, capping it in that 760 ballpark. Am I oversimplifying it? Is that your recommendation?
Through the chair, I don't think you're oversimplifying it. It sounds like universally that both boards are interested in doing the article, voting for the article, and if that's the case, then you're correct. We wouldn't have to change our proposed budget. We would just add the article to the warrant. If it were part of the assessment, then we would have to change the assessment number, the bottom line number in the budget. Either way, it's a vote.
What's the board's pleasure?
I asked a question. I just asked a question.
Come up.
Come to the podium.
So the 760 really won't be approved. It's 480 that will be approved, and then the 280 will be contingent in the fall. Is that the basic, is that how it's gonna work?
Yes.
That's so basically it's 480, which is your original recommendation a couple of weeks ago?
It would be 489.20 on the assessment with an article in the fall for an additional 280 supplemental amount.
And that'll bring it up to the 3.23%. Together, that would make the 3.23% that we had recommended. Correct, is that correct?
Yes, yeah, we're not there yet as a.
No, I'm
committee,
just
but-
asking for clarification, so if someone asks me. So basically, you're still sticking with the 480, so if the 280 fails in the fall, we're at the 280, correct?
Right.
Okay, I just wanted that for clarification. That's correct, Mr. Everyone? All right, I just
Well,
wanted to
for-
make sure that was discussed.
For clarification's sake, we're out the 280 on the Dudley side assessment and, you know, an approximate amount on the Charlton side, so
right.
call it $600,000.
It'd be
between the
about
two.
600, yep.
Okay, all right, thanks.
With Charlton, yes, 600 with Charlton.
Right,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
got that part. Thank you.
So, Mr. Chair, take that one step further, Charlton would have to do a similar action to what we're doing. And I can't speak for Charlton, nor would I ever try, but if I was in their shoes and I'm fully funding in the spring, I would think they would have no problem making up the shortfall in the fall, I would think. Like I said, I can't speak for them. I think it's great that they can come up to the number right out of the gate. And to Mrs. Cabala's point, yeah, that comes to a overall 3% in that range, but on the Dudley side, the 760 would reflect, let's just say it again, would reflect a 7.5% increase, not a 3%.
Yeah, to your point, it's 3% of our budget.
Yeah, totally.
Right, to your point. Of the $54 million budget over here.
So,
So what's,
well, I just want to add, Mr. Chairman, you know, Charlton's already, you know, they've already agreed on the full school committee budget. So if we go this route now of trying to do this in the fall on an article, we're gonna get Charlton to do the same thing. So what's the likelihood that this may happen? I'm a little nervous that it's not gonna happen that way. So I'm almost now leaning to putting this in the assessment now. At this point,
I knew you'd get there, Mr. Ruda, Chair. I knew you'd get there.
I mean, I just don't wanna have a floor fight here later on.
Well, if you
and take
stick
the-
that in, I think you might.
Well, this is all dependent on Charlton. They're willing to come down,
We
not only
can't
come
work-
off the budget, or,
We can't control what they do.
I know.
We're Dudley.
We're elected
No matter
by the
what, it's,
people
no
here
matter what,
to
it's the same
represent.
amount of money, whether we put it in the assessment or we put it in the fall, it's the same exact amount of money, it's coming from the same place. So, I'm just kinda concerned that if we try to continue going on, trying to do this in the fall on an article, we run the risk of it failing, number one, and we run the risk of Charlton denying this and not coming along with our assessment, so I'm just.
It's 280, Mr. Chairman, one way or another.
Chief?
I was just gonna say, and I'm sorry if everybody doesn't agree with me, but I agree with Mr. Mayotte, only because you say we're two separate towns, but if you just give them the money up front, it's easier for Charlton, doesn't muddy the waters. I think the school probably, and I'm not speaking for you, but they'll feel more comfortable with that, work towards the compromise, and it's all said and done in the spring.
Mr. Ritter, do we have this 280, or are we waiting to receive it?
We have the 280, we will have the 280 in time for May 23rd.
Today, do we have it in the account?
It's a technicality, but no, we don't have it in the
Okay.
account because I've got to move some line items around.
Okay.
How quickly could you have the 280?
Tomorrow morning.
So we're not waiting on a state, federal agency to give us this?
That's why,
280?
no, that's why I'm
That's what I thought.
recommending free cash as opposed to ARPA funding, because we have the free cash.
So,
I'm not asking you to end the discussion, but if everybody's had their say, I'm willing to make a motion, see if it stands, fails, gets voted on.
what's the board's pleasure?
I'm ready to-
Did you?
This is okay.
This is okay.
It's okay.
You're supposed to hurry up.
Well, nice that the Dudley people came up and participated on this.
For the 280 now, that you want to wait for in the fall, could you use your ESSA grant? Do you have money there that you could give to us? Do you have enough there
Give me,
in
through
the ESSA
chair,
grant?
it's the ARPA money you're
Right.
referring to, right?
Same kind of money.
Same.
Yeah,
Could we use it there? Could we take money from that?
the problem with the ARPA money is that it's been infused into the FY '22 budget, and the next payment is due sometime between June and August, and we can't pass a budget without them knowing that we have the revenue, so that's
Right.
why I was leaning towards free cash.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, make a motion based on the town administrator's recommendation to the board that we let our 5% vote stand and propose a warrant article at the Springtown meeting in the amount of $280,000 to vote transfer free cash as a supplemental appropriation to the Dudley Charlton Regional School District's budget for use in FY '23.
Second.
Is this a joint vote?
I think they need separate votes, Mr.
Separate
Chairman.
votes.
Should the FAA go first then?
Yes.
No, Mr. Chair, unless I'm wrong, we put forth the budget with FAA recommendations. So this would be a warrant article we propose, and when you get the handout of town meeting, it has FAA yes, no, pass over, fund. That I think the proper way we make the motion. They decide whether they support it and source of funding and all other information, my opinion. They shouldn't go first.
I think either way, they can make any recommendation, the FAA can certainly make any recommendation they want to the town meeting. Yeah.
That's what I'm saying, make a recommendation based on our vote. We don't make a vote based on,
They
Yeah.
right, they make
The
a
other way around.
recommendation based on a proposed budget.
John, that makes sense?
Yes.
FAA discussed this?
No, I think we call it to a vote, see if it stands. No sense wasting their time discussing it if it's gonna fail, deadlock, or pass.
All right, so the original proposal 280 in the fall, 5% stands.
Yes, in a nutshell.
Not the opinion that we just discussed about just going the full amount.
If this fails, that could be the next vote.
Gotcha. All right, roll call vote.
Stephen Sullivan, aye.
Carrie Siganovich, aye.
John Marcy, aye.
Jay Johnson, aye, unanimous.
Now, Mr. Chairman, the FAA will take a vote and make whatever they vote will be the printed recommendation to the town meeting.
Okay, so you heard the motion. It's been approved by the selectmen. Does anybody want to make a recommendation by FAA?
Mr. Chairman, I make a recommendation, pass over article until fiscal year '23 fall special town meeting.
Is there a second on that?
Sorry, second.
Is there any discussion on that? All right, the only thing I got to say is I still think we're taking a little bit of a chance here. The money, whether it's fall or it's in this assessment in the spring, we're taking a chance that we gotta have Charlton also agree with this. And, when they've already approved the higher end budget, they gotta come down in their budget and they gotta agree to do this in the fall. I think we're just taking a big chance on that. However,
Mr. Chairman,
yeah.
I'm going to continue to be in contact with Mr. Matthew and Mr. LaMarche, and I think that we still have the ability, if they feel that there's going to be a problem in Charlton, we can certainly change the recommendation as you meet before the town meeting on May 23rd. We could pass over the article and make an amendment on the floor to the bottom line budget. We still have another bite of the apple is what I'm trying to say.
Sure.
Mr. Chair, too, they also have a mechanism through the district agreement to work towards a different number. There's a mechanism that can be used if they're unable to get a consensus on the other side, which I believe has only been used once, but can be used.
I think, Mr. Chairman, there would be a willingness to make an adjustment if we needed to without having to go, and you're right, Mr. Sullivan, but we may be able to make that adjustment if necessary the night of the town meeting.
All right, is there any other discussion on it? So the motion is to pass over, was your recommendation?
Yes, sir.
All right.
To the fall town meeting.
Fall town
Right.
meeting.
And not
Okay.
pass over.
All right, pass over to the fall town meeting.
Right.
All right. Since there's no other discussion, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right. Approved?
Is that unanimous on the FAA?
Yes.
All right. Next item.
Thank you,
Thank
folks.
you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Departmental communication. Jeff.
Thank you. That's what she was putting in. Thank you.
Just a few updates. We're beginning the street sweeping, which there's far less material to pick up with out having sanded this year, but we're out beginning this week. Also, the sidewalk project for Mason Road has been posted in the register. That'll go out to bid on the 28th, just prior to the water department's projects. And that's pretty much about it for the highway department. Thanks.
Thank you. Chief?
Just two quick things. We had our Easter flower sale this past weekend. It was very well received. We sold a lot of flowers. I don't know the exact number yet that the association brought in. They still have to count it, but we actually got a second delivery on Sunday. So it was glad to see some of you came and bought flowers. That's always good. Support the fire department and the association. Also, I don't know if some of you may or may not recall, we did a Citizens Fire Academy a few years back. I intend on running that program again in the fall. We had skipped a couple years. One was due to the station construction, and the second year was due to COVID, the COVID lockdown. So we plan on bringing that out in the fall. It'll be on the town website, the fire department website, and we'll also post it on our department page as well as the town page, and we'll get the information out there in plenty of time. Thanks.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I just want to say to the chief, same thing about the flower sale. It was nice that the flowers actually showed up a day earlier than usual, and it was pretty brisk on Thursday for being unexpected. It was a lot, I was there for a while. There was a lot of people that rolled in on Thursday. Nicely done over there.
Board members' comments.
I'll go first, Mr. Chair. I think tonight was a productive discussion. At both sides on the budgetaries got their points out in the open. I think these two boards with the town administrator, we made a commitment in the fall to get schools to my opinion, don't want to line item their budget to death. A 7.5 increase on the Dudley assessment is extremely healthy. I would like to, the flip side would be the cynic in me would say, let them take 1.8% next year and we'll give our town budget 7.5, but we know that won't happen. So I think we did a nice job tonight, helping set the financial parameters. And we didn't meet before Easter, so I hope everyone had a nice Easter. Ramadan and whatever else you celebrate.
Terry?
Yes, Chief, excellent flowers. Blue hydrangeas going in the ground in a couple of weeks. Good stuff. More than, I'd rather give you folks the money than national conglomerate of some sort. But I didn't want to bring this up while the school people were here because I didn't want to get into a back and forth, bring a point and whatever, but I'm going to say this now so that it's recorded, memorialized. This increase isn't sustainable. And it's nothing personal, it's nothing against the school. I'm a graduate of the school. My kids went to the school. It's a good school. But the way Massachusetts works is there's the 2.5, Prop 2.5. We can only raise our taxes so much. And when you've got two halves of the budget and one half asking 7%, the other half has to make up that difference below 2.5. And we've kicked the can down the road a lot with infrastructure, with things that we need, and we just can't do it anymore. Somehow we need to work together and fix this. I know we've spoken previously about how the school needs to get an override. This isn't the first time. This shouldn't be news to anyone. Since Mr. Lamar started here, we've talked about this. I remember one budget, he asked us, what do you need? So I know for the future. Well, we need to get on this. Once this is settled, we need to get on this. Not in 6 months, not in 9 months, in April or May, we need to start on this. We owe it to the people of this town to fix this and get it right going forward, not just kicking the can down the road. That's it. Thank you.
Mr. Marcy?
I think he dropped.
Boo-hoo.
I think he had to take another call, he said, for work.
I'd just like to say, this is a town and district issue that we have to deal with. Let's all remember the root cause is a much larger issue between state and federal issues, inflation and stuff. So we're not going to solve that in this room. Probably, definitely not going to solve it in the State House or, so we're all in that together. So I'm glad we could have a civil discussion and work through some of these issues. Thank you for all your input. Student rep, not here. Did I get everyone?
We had a student rep.
We do, she's had scheduling conflicts.
Okay. We miss her input.
It's the board's pleasure.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
No?
Thank you.
We do roll call vote, he's dropped off.
Might as well.
Roll call vote.
Yes.
Yes.
Aye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Motion to adjourn the FAA?
Make a motion to adjourn the FAA meeting.
Second.
Should let Kelly make
All in
it.
favor? All right, we're adjourned.
Ellie ran here.
Sorry.
Thanks, everybody.
We had karate.
Oh, yeah.
Listen, I remember those days well.
Me too.